What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kenahan, and today's episode, we've got some pretty cool stuff. We've got some, first off, I'm going to go over some Terry McLaurin news because we've got to talk about that. But then after that, I have an interview with Bobby Peters. If you don't know who he is, he's a writer. He's written over 30 plus informational manuals breaking down all different types of NFL offenses. He recently published a book, and it was about the Commanders offense from last year and Kliff Kingsbury and the creativity that Kingsbury, Anthony Lynn, and the Washington Commanders had in their offense with Jane Daniels and, some of those weapons and, Jane Daniels at quarterback, how much of an impact he played. I got a chance to talk to Bobby about all of that. So that interview will be happening in a little bit. But first, before we get to that, I want to talk about Terry McLaurin because I need to talk about Terry McLaurin. I feel like Commander's Twitter has been going on a tear about Terry McLaurin and his current holdout. But I'm recording this, I believe, on the Tuesday before this comes out, because by the time this episode comes out, I am going to be in Oakmont and at the U.S. Open, as I'm working at the U.S. Open over there this past weekend, I guess, when this episode comes out. But I'll be in Oakmont when this episode releases. So I'm recording this now, and I want to talk about Terry McLaurin's holdout right now. So hopefully he doesn't sign. I mean, maybe he does sign an extension. So hopefully he does sign an extension. But if he doesn't, we've still got this. But Terry McLaurin, basically, we had mandatory minicamp Tuesday through Thursday, right? And Terry McLaurin did not attend mandatory minicamp. This is the first mandatory practice of the season for NFL players to attend. And Terry McLaurin was not there because of his contract. Terry is entering the final year of his contract that he signed back in 2021, I believe. The summer of 2021, I think, is when he signed it, or maybe the summer of 2022. But he's now heading into the final year of his contract for Washington, and he wants an extension, which he deserves an extension. He's probably going to end up making top-end wide receiver money. He wants to be a Commander for life. And Adam Peters, he said the same. He wants, Terry to be a Commander for life as well. But Terry McLaurin has not attended the mandatory practices, and he's now being fined because of it, of course, because of this contract. Now, Commanders Twitter is acting like this has never happened before, right? But the reality is the Commanders just have not had a player of Terry's caliber to sign to an extension, enough so that the player would hold out in, I don't know how long. It's been a while since maybe last time Terry signed an extension, because this is the exact same thing that happened with Terry last year, or not last year, but last time he signed an extension. He held out a mandatory minicamp, and then they ended up and OTAs, I believe, as well. And then they ended up signing him to an extension in July, which then he attended training camp, of course, because he got that extension. But, this is a similar thing. That's what happened last time. Again, we had a different regime overhead. I was very, very concerned back then that Terry wouldn't sign an extension just because of, who he had at the top still at the time. But now I'm very confident that he will end up signing an extension with the Washington Commanders. I am not going to be overreacting and saying, oh, this is the end of the world. Terry McLaurin did not attend these minicamp practices. Day one, if that he missed, he's being fined $17,462. Day two, he's being fined $34,925. Day three, $52,381. I don't know where they come with these numbers from. It is a very specific number for all three of these days. But the final total is, at the end, if he misses all 3 days of minicamp, he is being fined $104,768. That is not a lot of money, I guess, for an NFL player. But, just looking at it as a non-NFL player, that is definitely a lot of money. But ultimately, if they sign an extension, if Terry does sign an extension with Washington, the Commanders are able to waive these fines, and so Terry doesn't even have to pay them. So the fines are really not, that important to Terry, I would expect. I would expect right now the deal to be between $33 to $35 million. I think that's kind of what the issue is per year. The top-end wide receiver money, I believe, is at $35 million right now. Washington, I think, is probably sitting in the low $30 million range. they're probably wanting him to accept, 32, 33. Terry wants 35. I would expect them. That's probably what the issue is. Maybe it's the guaranteed money on that contract as well. Terry McLaurin is going to be 30 years old in September. All right. This is going to probably be his final, extension, big time money extension that he signs with the team in his NFL career, which is pretty crazy to say. But Terry McLaurin and the Washington Commanders have still not yet agreed to an extension. By the time this episode comes out, maybe they have, but that is what I've got to say about that. But now, again, like I mentioned, this is a little bit of a shorter pod because I'm going to be in Oakmont tomorrow as I'm recording this, but I'm going to be, at the US Open, so I won't have time to record. But now I do want to go to my interview with Bobby Peters. So here is myself, Bobby Peters, breaking down the Washington Commanders offense. Joining the show today is a writer of 30-plus informational manuals breaking down NFL offenses, and he runs one of the top accounts on Twitter that I go to when I want to learn about unique play designs and schemes. I'm excited to welcome Bobby Peters to the show today. Bobby, how are you doing?
Pretty good, Mason. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be a great episode here. I first off wanted to start and ask a question about you before we jump into Kliff Kingsbury's offense and the Washington Commanders last season. I know you're a high school football coach, and like I mentioned earlier, you've written a lot of informational manuals and articles as well about NFL offenses. What led you to being interested in coaching and spreading your insightful knowledge of the game to others?
Obviously a love for the game, right? You can't, I think this, I was joking with my wife and some of our friends the other day. I think I've pushed out almost 2,000 pages of football, paperback content so far this year. And, if you don't love it, you don't do that, right? Like I was doing this. I remember when I first started doing this, right? Like, I was doing it for free before I even started publishing stuff. Not going to the extent that I do now, but like trying to get better as a coach and trying to learn. So it starts with the love of the game. And I think that kind of comes back to like back when I played, I had some good, I was blessed to have a couple of good coaches in my life, in high school that, really, instilled confidence in me. And I saw that through the game. And I was like, wow, with good coaching and confidence, a player or a person can do great things. And, that's just something that the game instilled in me. And I always wanted to, kind of return the favor.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think we see that with a lot, just people's love for the game just takes them and, has done incredible things. You've done incredible things with your work. I know I've learned a lot from the stuff that you've done. And especially what I want to focus on today is, since this is a Commanders podcast, Kliff Kingsbury and your manual about the Commanders offense. Kliff Kingsbury and the Commanders last year had one of the most successful and one of the top offenses in the league. Kliff has worked with a lot of dual threat quarterbacks in the past, and his offense has been known to start off pretty hot and usually at the top of the league, but it's tended to fall off down in the second half of the stretch of the season. In 2024, that wasn't really the case. What are some of the biggest ways you've seen him adjust his offense to find more success here in his second stint in the NFL?
That's a great question. And my answer, is obviously, from the outside. This one's harder to answer than some other questions, from the outside in. And obviously not having had studied his Cardinals offenses to the degree that I do for some of the other teams. But I think what I saw was an expansive run game that had answers for what the defense was doing every week, right? Like they had base concepts, but within those base concepts, they had adaptions and different tags, run game tags for the quarterback, and also like RPO tags, to throw the ball off those looks too. And I think if you have a good run game, I think that can sustain you throughout a season, right? Like that's something that every week, you can count on, right? Like quarterback play, your quarterback might have a bad day, or the defense might throw some curveballs at him on third downs to, force some turnovers or something, right? Stuff happens. But if you have a good run game, I think that can kind of sustain you for a full season. And that's definitely something that they had last year.
Yeah, and that's actually what I really want to focus on today is that run game, because it was just so creative what Kliff Kingsbury and Anthony Lynn as well, how they designed the run game that Washington had last year, and also having Jay and Daniels and those two running backs helped as well. But one design I want to focus on right now is the pin pull designs, which was one of the more successful run game concepts for Washington last season. Just to kind of break down what the pin pull is, you can explain more detail if you want, but it's basically, the offense pins the end man on the line of scrimmage, whether it's an edge rusher or outside linebacker, whoever that may be, and is able to pull with some of the interior offensive linemen to get blockers moving in space to block for the ball carrier. What made this concept so successful for Washington that you saw? And also if you want to add on to what it is as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty fair description. I think, from like the technical jargonese perspective, it's you can describe it as kind of like it's like the gap complement to outside zone, right? So like if you're, from my history and my perspective, if your offensive line struggles with the combination blocks, whether it be they just struggle with the communication element of it or whatever, the backers are flowing quickly. Pin pull's a perfect complement for this, right? So now you're if your offensive lineman has somebody head up on him or, in their backside gap, they're going to block down on him. And then if not, they're going to pull, right? So usually, like you said, you'll get somebody pinning the end man on line of scrimmage, and then you'll get two pullers leading around the edge, someone to kick out the force, someone to lead up for the alley. And that's basically what it looks like. And there's a lot of things you can do with it. You can, game plan it a lot of different ways. You can get the quarterback involved with the pin pull. You can fake jet sweep one way and go pin pull the other way. You can kind of run like a pin pull jet sweep too. And then you can RPO it too. If you lock the backside tackle on the defensive end, you can throw like double slants or, there's some bang concepts that the Commanders were calling with it too. So it's super flexible from that standpoint. And I think what made the Commanders really successful with it was there was one clip against the Browns that really stuck out to me. It was a long run where the details of the play were really sound. Like you got the awesome pin down block, the kick out block, created a hole for the lead blocker to lead up through. And it was just a beautiful clip. And it was just married really well with the formation for what the defense the Browns were doing. So they're, just the design of the concepts, but also the coaching of the details, right? The ability to kind of create space within the front.
Yeah. And the concept, again, was super successful for Washington last year. Overall, just their run game, I felt, was so much more creative than it was in the past few years. The Commanders were also a heavy inside zone read team. And you mentioned, adding just these RPOs and these options for Jane Daniels. And just having Jane Daniels as your quarterback is just such a refreshing thing as a Washington fan, seeing, Kirk Cousins was like our last multi-year starter for Washington. You couldn't run some of the stuff with Kirk Cousins like you're running with Jane Daniels. So some of these inside zone reads were, especially on the early downs, were pretty successful for Washington. They ran this concept in many different formations and looks throughout the season. What were some of the most creative ways you saw them run inside zone read?
Probably some of the red zone stuff and the variations where they're including, whether it be from a regular formation or even some unbalanced, like Kliff and company did a really good job of getting into some unbalanced and tackle over formations too, which is relatively unique in the NFL. You'll see it in high school and college ball, but not a ton in the NFL. So that was pretty unique. But there were variations where they would, whether it be bringing the flat route from the other side on kind of what I call a slide route, or from the same side and kind of running like an arrow. But then the play side receiver would kind of, jog inside like he's going to kind of like stalk block or crack the second level defender, and then he'd kind of break to the corner. Like I said, it's kind of a short yardage red zone variation. And I believe they scored like 2 or 3 touchdowns on that variation throughout the season. So that was probably, and then that's probably my favorite RPO off it. And then obviously all the different ways they get Jaden involved, like with the different bluff actions. There's some double bluff concepts that they ran to get him involved with the read element of it, right? So when I say bluff, I mean like you've got off-ball tight ends or fullbacks leading around for the quarterback element, bluffing the end man on the line of scrimmage so that Daniels still reads him, right? He's the unblocked defender. And if he chases the running back, Daniels keeps it. But now he's got 2 lead blockers coming around the edge that came from the other side of the formation. So stuff like that just really messes with defenses.
Yeah, and it's just the amount of impact that Jane Daniels has on Washington's offense, and especially in the run game, is awesome to see. And my final question on the run game side of things, the addition of Deebo Samuel this offseason seemed like a pretty big priority for Adam Peters to bring to this team. How do you expect Deebo Samuel to kind of fit with this run game? And I'm assuming we're going to get some, creative backfield looks with Deebo. How does it kind of, open things up some more for this Washington team?
Yeah, I think having flexibility within the formation for the personnel pieces allows the offense to kind of do whatever it wants in any personnel grouping, right? It helps eliminate tendencies, but it also gives, like someone like Deebo, right? Like you can run those pin pull concepts with Deebo if you want to, right? He ran, stuff similar to that in San Francisco, like in 2021, 2022, et cetera. So you could run some of that stuff. You can run those bluff concepts with him too, right? He could be like one of the bluffers coming around. He could be one of the receivers running the slide route, right? He could run that kind of that stock corner I was talking about. So a player like that you can keep on the field, and he can run all the different elements without the defense kind of trying to clue in, like, okay, personnel wise, who does what specifically.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see what he can do on the field in 2025 for Washington, and beat some of these washed allegations. Hopefully that some NFL Twitter seems to be putting on him. But now moving on to the passing game, because there was some creative stuff there from Kliff overall as well. One of the concepts I want to focus on is the Hank concept, because I felt like I saw it a ton last year for Washington. It really seemed they used it a lot when they were kind of behind the sticks, usually on second and like longish and on third down. How successful was the Hank concept, and can you break that concept down to fans that may not know what it means?
Yeah, Hank is an old school West Coast concept. So what you're trying to do is you're getting a route over the ball, right? So it's either a tight end or a slot receiver is going to run, maybe like there's two different versions. You can run the shorter version or the longer version, where the receiver will run at like 5 to 10 yards, like over the ball, and just sit down right there, right? So right in front of the center. And that's the first read for the quarterback traditionally. So it'll take like a 3-step drop from gun, or, if you're running the longer version, it'll take a 5-step drop from gun. And that's his first read. If that against cover 2 coverages, Tampa 2, you'll get that guy one-on-one with the Mike linebacker, and you can usually you fit that ball in, right? But if the defense wants to squeeze it, say they're playing like a single high coverage and he gets squeezed, whichever side that second defender comes from, that squeeze, he's going to read a curl flat concept to that side. So there's curl flats on the outside mirrored, and then you've got the Hank route over the middle. Yeah. So it looks like 3 curls downfield with 2 receivers kind of running to the flats. And there's a lot of different ways you can get to it. I thought Kliff did a good job of mixing in different protections and kind of little like chips, right? Little chips on the defensive end. The tight end will chip before he runs the flat route, right? Because that's the last read in the progression for the quarterback. So he doesn't need to be the first, he doesn't need to be in the flat immediately, right? Like he can chip, and then eventually, like by the time he gets to the flat, that's when Jaden would be, looking for him. So different things like that are the finer details of the play, but that's essentially what the play is. And it's a versatile play. It's an old school play. It's neat to see it still have a place in the NFL. And like I said, it's, you try to isolate that guy over the middle against 2 high looks, right? You try to get that matchup of that slot receiver, like on a Mike linebacker. But if you get single high, if that gets squeezed, now you're looking to high, low, flat defenders on the outside.
Yeah. And again, that concept I felt we saw a lot of, especially when they were sort of behind the sticks, maybe a 2nd and 9, or even, the take a negative play, that concept came out for Washington. And there was some scenarios where it worked out pretty well. And there was a lot of deep curls within Washington, within the manual that you wrote. And I thought that was a pretty unique design that Kliff Kingsbury had. The final concept here I want to look at is the tunnel screen stuff that Kliff Kingsbury did, because it felt like, for me, watching it on screen, it was very boom or bust for some of these screens. It felt like, if one blocker missed, if one defender didn't get fooled, or one blocker missed their assignment, it really seemed to, blow up in their face. What were your thoughts on the tunnel screen concept from Kliff? That's been a staple of his, I believe, for a while.
Yes, no, this is my favorite section of the book to write, I think. Whenever I think of, it's been a month or 2 since I finished it up, and whenever I think about the Commanders, I always think about that tunnel screen section. They had some incredible designs. I think they called it 37 times last year. I think they averaged like 5.5 yards a clip on it, which isn't, it's nothing spectacular. But like you said, there was boom or bust. They definitely had some big plays on it. Some of the designs really helped them. Tunnel screens are tricky in the sense that, if one, if somebody takes a false step one way, it could be the difference of the ball being tackled at the line of scrimmage or going 50 yards. It's one of the, especially if the defense blitzes, you could really gash them, right? It's a nice blitz protector. It's a nice blitz deterrent. And the Commanders and Kliff had so many creative designs with it. I think I spent 15 or 16 pages on that, which is which is a lot for, one specific section, let alone a screen section. So that was, like I said, I think probably my favorite area to study.
Yeah, there's definitely more designs for that tunnel screen of the you had the list of all the just different ways they ran it and everything. There was more for that, I believe, than any other play design they had. So they definitely used it a lot and focused on it a lot. But that's pretty much all I've got here today. Before we head out, Bobby, if someone watching wants to learn more about Kliff Kingsbury's offense or many of the other great play callers here in the NFL, where can they find your work? Because I know you've break down many teams. Like you said, over 30 plus informational manuals.
Yeah. So my homepage is alertthepost.com. Up at the top banner, you can, there's like lists of articles, the recent articles I've written, the archives. I've got a cut up library up there too. So if you're looking for, video of a specific clip, I may or may not have it. If not, reach out and request it, and I can get it up pretty soon. And then also there's like a banner for my books too. So if you Google my name or you go off the banner at the top of the website, you should be able to find my author page on Amazon. But the title of the book on the Commanders is the 2024 Washington Commanders Complete Offensive Manual. It's a little over 300 pages. I break down the offense by concept. Like I said, I had a lot of fun studying it. There were a lot, some of the stuff we've talked about today, right? Like there's a lot of interesting elements of the offense that made it a worthwhile study.
Yeah, I definitely recommend getting it if you're into watching. If you're a Commanders fan and want to learn more about Kliff Kingsbury's offense, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And I hope that they are successful once more. So then you would write about them again in 2025 or 2026, I guess, next year. So that'll wrap things up though in this one. Thank you for your time, Bobby.
Of course. Thanks, Mason.
That'll wrap up the interview and this episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully by now, Terry McLaurin has signed an extension, hopefully. But we shall see. That'll wrap things up here on this week's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. See you guys next one. Peace.